The Senate Foreign Relations Committee is chaired by Democratic Senator Claiborne Pell of Rhode Island.
The committee will come to order. I'm very glad to welcome Undersecretary Bartholomew and Undersecretary Wolfowitz to discuss the administration's proposal to sell $7.5 billion in arms equipment and services to Saudi Arabia. We are all certainly aware that this is a difficult situation and a difficult time in the Gulf region, and a very trying situation for Saudi Arabia, which now is on the front line against the belligerent forces of Iraqi President Saddam Hussein. The Senate is, I believe, sympathetic to the argument that the Saudi forces should have the arms and equipment appropriate to the current crisis needs, as well as certain equipment as may be necessary to defend against significant outside threats, such as tactical ballistic missiles possessed by both Iran and Iraq. It will be necessary to understand what, if any, portions of the package proposed might be inappropriate at this time. Moreover, the committee will want to know what kind of package the administration intends to propose early next year, as well as long-term plans for sales to Saudi Arabia. It will be important to ascertain the likely effect of the proposed sale upon the Middle East military balance and vital U.S. interests in that region. We will now be glad to hear from Mr. Bartholomew and Mr. Wolfowitz, whichever way you care to present the administration's thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have come before you this morning, Undersecretary Wolfowitz and I, to discuss the administration's plan to proceed expeditiously with this important sale of defense equipment to Saudi Arabia. As you know, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we began consultations with members of the Congress on Saudi Arabia's arms request 2 weeks ago. Following those consultations, and I think I can say very much taking those consultations into account, the President directed us to proceed with the sale in 2 phases, the first of which we notified last week, and we are to the Congress last week, and we are here to discuss today. This morning we will ask you to consider, as we have, how this sale bears on United States interests and objectives in the current Gulf crisis and after that crisis, beyond that crisis, vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia, but also for the region as a whole. In that context, the administration believes that this sale is but one step, an important step, in assisting the nations of the area in the current crisis and in building lasting stability in the region. In his remarks to the United Nations General Assembly on October 1st, President Bush delineated the objectives and stakes that led to the dispatch of major United States military forces to the Gulf. Mr. Chairman, the Iraqi aggression is indeed a watershed. That aggression must be undone. But even after Iraqi aggression is undone, it will be necessary to take steps to establish and maintain a stable balance to deter and to defend against aggression, and to ensure the security and confidence of our friends in the Gulf, and this regardless of the fate of Saddam Hussein. We must, of course, work with our friends to achieve this objective, and this will require more planning and consultation. But we know already that lasting security in the Gulf should not depend on the long-term presence of United States forces, nor should it depend solely on a willingness to repeat Desert Shield. Ultimately, lasting regional stability will require that our friends in the region do more to help themselves in close cooperation, yes, with the United States and with others. Thus, Mr. Chairman, we seek through this sale first to help build an increased capability to deter and defend against potential aggressors in the Gulf. Second, to buy more time in the event deterrence fails for mobilization of support from friendly governments. Third, to develop the interoperability, the base that will allow the U.S. and other friendly forces to reinforce the Saudis more effectively, should that ever again be necessary. And fourth, to help contribute to stronger and more stable post-crisis security arrangements. Now, it needs to be said that neither the states in the region nor we think that they can build by themselves the full range of forces that in themselves can deter and defend against potential aggressive states, states which have a far larger population and resource base than the Desert Gulf, the Desert Shield partners enjoy. Support by the United States and others for security relationships in the Gulf is now and will continue to be an essential element to the success of any such endeavor. But Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states themselves must collectively serve as the principal partners in any such security arrangement. They must have the defensive strength to raise the initial cost to an aggressor high enough to help deter aggression, and if deterrence should fail, they must be able to delay an aggressor until help arrives. This would be, Mr. Chairman, a marked improvement upon the situation that prevailed on the 2nd of August. The Saudis and the other Gulf states have made clear to us that they want to do more in their own defense, both in the current crisis and in the longer term. Their troops have been deployed in the front line since the early days of the crisis, and in the ensuing 2 months, we and the Saudis have discussed what was needed and available to assist them in defending against the Iraqi threat. The first Saudi arms package, announced in August, partially met those needs by providing 24 F-15CD aircraft, air defense aircraft, Stinger missiles, M60A3 tanks, and depleted uranium ammunition. But important as that sale was, it was only an initial response. What we are now proposing is a larger, a broader response in phases to bolster Saudi Arabia and its Gulf partners as they continue to face armor and air attack threats. The items in Phase 1, which have been notified for your review, address these specific Saudi requirements. My colleague, Mr. Wolfowitz, we have notified these to you, and my colleague, Mr. Wolfowitz, will go into some of them in more detail. Phase 2, which we are planning to submit for your consideration in January, would continue the improvement of Saudi and Gulf state abilities to defend against these threats. While we expect its components to evolve with circumstances in the area, we anticipate it also would focus on meeting armor and air attack threats. Mr. Chairman, what we have proposed to sell to our friends in the Gulf and what we will propose to sell them constitute the elements of a force that can provide a basic defensive capability and a capability that can be absorbed, that they can manage. I noted in your opening remarks, Mr. Chairman, your reference to the balance in the Middle East. May I say that this force will not provide, this sale and our plans will not provide the Saudis or other Gulf states with a major offensive capability. Rather, by providing a substantially strengthened deterrent, that defensive capability will meet the need for a better balance of regional forces in the Persian Gulf, a need that has been underscored by Iraq's aggression. Mr. Chairman, we want to reassure you and the members of the committee on one particularly important point. As we always do, we have considered the potential impact of this sale on the security of Israel. Though the President and the members of his cabinet have underscored this point in recent days, it bears repeating here today. This administration's commitment to the security of Israel is unshakable. A crucial part of this commitment, is to help maintain Israel's qualitative superiority over its potential adversaries. We do not believe that enhancing the deterrent and defensive capabilities of our Saudi and Gulf partners will detract from this fundamental commitment. We believe, in fact, that security and stability in the Gulf region will support Israel's security as well. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, what the President proposes with these sales is to take a step, an important step, toward the security and stability that we want to help create in the region. We must begin to provide the required capability now. Some of the items we have proposed in this sale will be available quickly and will contribute on the ground to the Desert Shield mission. But those items not available immediately can also contribute to our efforts today. They demonstrate our commitment to a mutual defense effort, not only to our friends who look to us to help in their self-defense, but also to those who might be tempted to prolong the crisis to test our resolve. They demonstrate our commitment to a lasting solution to instability in the region, a solution that is fundamentally indigenous to the region rather than one imposed from the outside. And in so doing, we believe they will protect crucial American interests and advance the cause of peace. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bartholomew. Mr. Wolfowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Cranston.
I would add that your full statement will be inserted in the record if you care to abbreviate it in any way.
I will do so. In fact, let me submit the full statement for the record and just go through what I think are some of the most important points in it.
Thank you.
I, too, appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to seek congressional support for the approval of urgently needed defense equipment for Saudi Arabia and Bahrain on an accelerated basis. Our forces in the Arabian Peninsula today are there to defend the vital interests of the United States. It is in the context of these interests and that commitment that you are considering our proposal to provide defense equipment to the Saudi forces, alongside whom our men and women are serving. It is no exaggeration to say that we are at a decisive moment in history. How we deal with the present issues will determine the shape of the world we live in for many years to come. The main reason American forces are in the Persian Gulf is to make sure that no hostile power, and particularly not this brutal Iraqi dictatorship, be allowed to dominate the energy supplies that are the lifeblood of the world economy. The second reason is to make sure that Saddam Hussein's outrageous invasion of Kuwait will not succeed or become the norm of international behavior. And finally, we're there to ensure that American defense partnerships will be trusted by our friends and respected by our foes. Every country with whom the United States has a security relationship, from South Korea to Israel to our allies in Europe, can feel more confident because of the decisive commitment that we have demonstrated over the last 2 months. The United States stands by its friends. It is undeniable that there are serious threats to our interests in Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states. As long as these countries possess such valuable resources, there will be those who seek to plunder them. The present threat, of course, comes from Iraq. Iraq has the world's 6th largest active military force, behind only the Soviet Union, China, the United States, India, and North Korea. It has 5,500 main battle tanks, more than any country in NATO except for the United States, more than any country in the Warsaw Pact except the Soviet Union. Some have said that once Desert Shield is over, Iraq will no longer be a threat because U.S. and allied forces will have destroyed the Iraqi military. We cannot count on that. To the contrary, we still hope there will not be a war. True, no matter what the outcome, we all hope that Iraq's massive military machine will be reduced, preferably by peaceful means. But no outcome is likely to permanently eliminate Iraq as a regional power, and if it did so, that would merely create new threats to regional stability. The fundamental reality is that there is a basic imbalance in population and resources between the Arabian Peninsula countries in which we have vital interests and their 2 larger, stronger, and frequently hostile neighbors to the north. The security of the Arabian Peninsula in the first instance must be the responsibility of those who live there. We are perhaps sometimes tempted to take matters out of the hands of those most affected and into our own, but that is a mistake. In the long run, while we must provide the capabilities the countries in the region cannot provide, we should not do for them what they can do for themselves. The cornerstone of our strategy, therefore, must be strong security ties between the United States and the countries of the so-called Gulf Cooperation Council, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and hopefully in the future a free and independent Kuwait. A comprehensive program of well-conceived defense sales to the GCC states will contribute to their ability to defend themselves collectively by promoting standardization and interoperability. This standardization on U.S. equipment also promotes the ability of local armed forces to operate more effectively with U.S. units should reinforcement of the region be needed again in the future. Having said what these sales are, perhaps I should make clear what they are not. They are not fuel for an arms race in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia is outnumbered by Iraq by 10 to 1 in main battle tanks, by 4 to 1 in combat aircraft, by more than 8 to 1 in artillery. The military forces of all 6 GCC countries put together are less than half those of Iraq, Iran, Egypt, or Syria. Saddam Hussein did not build up his huge arsenal because he was afraid of Saudi Arabia or Kuwait. On the contrary, a better case can be made that the weakness of those 2 states led him to believe that he could successfully use military force to gain his objectives. If, when this crisis is resolved, it is possible to persuade the Iraqi government to adopt a different course and reduce its armed forces, the modest improvements we are proposing in Saudi forces will present no obstacle. Indeed, the very suggestion that Saudi Arabia could be regarded by Iraq as a threat would be ludicrous. We and our partners, moreover, have no illusions that we can or should even try to build the Saudi armed forces or the collective forces of the GCC into the equal of the Iraqi armed forces. But what the Saudis can do, given the will and the necessary equipment, is to build a force that would be capable of doing so much damage in a defensive role that any aggressor would have to think long and hard before invading Saudi Arabia. And moreover, should deterrence fail, we would want Saudi forces to be able to slow and perhaps stop an attacking army long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The force that we and the Saudis have in mind would then be able to operate effectively with U.S. and allied reinforcements and to provide capabilities such as fire support and heavy armor that we would not be able to lift quickly from the United States. If I might just make a digression for a moment, Mr. Chairman, I've heard some people say that's all well and good, but what good was the $57 billion, I think that's the figure, in U.S. foreign military sales that we gave to Saudi Arabia over the course of the last 10 years or more in the present crisis? My answer to that is it has been very valuable, and it's precisely that kind of value that we want to enhance. Of that total, roughly 80%, in fact, went not for buying weapon systems, but for building support systems, for building bases. The major base at King Khalid Military City that the United States is now operating out of, many of the other bases, including the naval bases at Jubail and Jeddah. Our entire logistics operation in Saudi Arabia today would be impossible without that kind of construction and logistics infrastructure that has been built up. But also the one area in which the Saudis concentrated on weapon systems over the last 10 years was in the area of air defense and airborne early warning. And when our forces were first arriving, one degree of comfort and protection that we derived, even though we had no defenses of our own on the ground at all, was that the Saudis had a credible air defense initially. But just to expand on that point, where the Saudi weakness was greatest was in ground defense. They were extremely vulnerable should the Iraqis have pushed forward across the border with their tanks. There was very little in the way of ground power that could stop that kind of Iraqi tank thrust. And frankly, if we are ever in a situation again where we need to come and reinforce, we don't want to be vulnerable in that way. And in fact, we think eliminating that kind of vulnerability is a major part of deterrence. Having placed our proposals into their proper strategic context, let me address the question of why these specific sales at this particular time. As you know, and I'd like to emphasize it, we consulted extensively with Congress about 2 weeks ago on a much larger package of equipment envisioned as part of a multi-year program. In response to those consultations, we took in mind the strongly presented view of the Congress that for longer-term items, you needed more time, the time that would be available when the new session starts in January, to consider those. And as a result, we are presenting to you today only the most urgently needed elements of that larger package, which the President decided to divide because of your desire to consider at greater length the majority of the sales we propose to make. We constructed this first phase based on 3 criteria. Items that could be delivered within a short period to be of immediate help in the current crisis, and/or items that required immediate decisions because of production considerations, and/or items that are particularly important to close urgent vulnerabilities that would be created by the withdrawal of our forces after this crisis is over. I say and/or because many items come under more than one of these criteria. The equipment we propose to sell in this first phase would start to arrive almost immediately after the completion of this notification, and most of it will be delivered within 12 months. In my written statement, Mr. Chairman, I go through each of the items item by item, but in the interest of time here, let me just focus on the 3 largest, and I suppose by implication also the 3 most important pieces of this package. The first are the Patriot fire units. There is little doubt that Saudi Arabia needs a better air defense missile than the Hawk system that's now in its inventory. This need has been recognized by both of us for some time, and the regional threat that we face from Iraq has led the United States to deploy large numbers of Patriots to protect our own forces in Desert Shield. One particularly important value of Patriot is that it is the only system available that provides any defense against tactical ballistic missiles, of which the Iraqis unfortunately have large numbers. 6 fire units, the equivalent of 1 standard U.S. Patriot battalion, is an extremely modest capability given the large land area that Saudi Arabia must defend. The units we are proposing to sell would be provided out of U.S. stocks when our air defense units depart Saudi Arabia at the conclusion of Desert Shield. Doing so will help to close an urgent gap in Saudi Arabia's defense capability, and we want to begin immediately on cross-training Saudi crews on these systems. The second large element of this package are the armored vehicles. As I've already said, one of the dramatic lessons already of Desert Shield is the pressing need for greater anti-armor capability in Saudi Arabia. Last year we took the first step in that direction when we notified Congress of the sale of 315 M1A2 Abrams tanks to upgrade Saudi Arabia's armored forces. The presently proposed sale of armored vehicles built around 150 M1A2s, which is the equivalent of about 1 armored brigade, would be the next step in this accelerated expansion and modernization. It helps to close that gap that I identified earlier, the gap that was the single greatest vulnerability during the early days of Desert Shield, the lack of adequate ground capability to stop Iraqi tanks. Let me emphasize, we're not talking about a huge or threatening force by any standard, and it is certainly small compared to others in the region. All 3 of Saudi Arabia's bigger neighbors, Iraq, Jordan, even Yemen, have over 1,000 tanks apiece. Sweden and Switzerland, to pick a very different sort of example, both peaceful neutral countries with much smaller land areas, maintain inventories of about 800 tanks each. A final point concerns why we are notifying the M1A2s now. By moving now, we will be able to produce these tanks concurrently with the 315 tanks notified last fall. That will lower costs not only for U.S. forces, but also make the M1A2 more attractive to other potential buyers. But perhaps most importantly, by moving now, we will shorten the lead time for closing what I've already noted is Saudi Arabia's single greatest vulnerability, and would become our greatest vulnerability if we ever had to bring our forces back. The third large piece of this package, Mr. Chairman, are the tactical wheeled vehicles. There are a total of 10,000 of these vehicles, primarily trucks. and they are needed to meet the logistical requirements of Saudi forces and friendly foreign forces now deployed to deter or defend against Iraq. The need is especially acute in the area of supporting the foreign forces in Saudi Arabia, particularly Egyptians, for which the Saudi armed forces have primary logistic responsibilities. Many of these vehicles will be delivered from existing stocks. The remainder will come from new production over the coming year. And if I might just expand on that for a moment, Mr. Chairman, the logistics requirements of supporting military forces in this extremely harsh environment where nothing is available locally, where there are almost no railroads to speak of and everything has to come by road, are simply enormous. Even water has to come hundreds of miles by road, and of these 10,000 vehicles, roughly 1,500 of them are water trucks. We pushed the Saudis and the Egyptians both very hard on the need to get other Arab forces in there so that the burden of combat, should there have to be a defense mounted, would not fall entirely on the United States or the United States and Saudi Arabia. And the Egyptians have risen to the challenge, and they are deploying there now in considerable strength. But their forces don't have the kind of logistics that are required to support them at those kinds of distances in the desert. And this package is essential to making that happen. Let me just say a few words about the absorption of this equipment, a subject that has been the focus of some comment in the past. In those areas where the Saudis have concentrated their efforts over the years, especially their Air Force, they have succeeded in building some credible capabilities. Frankly, until now, the Saudis have not taken the threat of a land invasion as seriously as that of air attack. Obviously, their view of that subject has changed dramatically. The Saudis are now determined to build sufficient land forces to deter Iraq, just as they built their air force to deter Iran. Given this determination, I am convinced that the Saudis are indeed capable of absorbing the types and amounts of equipment we propose to sell. Mr. Chairman, let me say a word about Israel's security. We are proposing these sales, of course, because we believe strongly that they enhance the protection of U.S. security interests in the Persian Gulf region. At the same time, we are certainly not unmindful of Israeli concerns about defense sales to a country that is at least technically in a state of war with Israel. We firmly believe that the risks this sale poses to Israel are minimal. This is based in part on the Saudi record of relatively minimal military involvement in past Arab-Israeli wars, and in part on the geographic obstacles to Saudi use of this equipment against Israel. But I would stress even more importantly that U.S. systems come with strict conditions, requiring purchasers to use them only for defensive purposes and restricting the transfer of U.S. equipment to third parties. I might add that Saudi Arabia's record for complying with these conditions is excellent. They are very well aware of those conditions, and we have made them clear on many occasions. Let me make a point that is frequently overlooked in public discussion of this issue, but that I believe is fundamental. A secure Saudi Arabia is in Israel's best interest. A secure Saudi Arabia will be able to make a far more constructive contribution to the peace and stability of the region than a Saudi Arabia living under the gun of an Iraqi bully. The Saudis have taken a momentous decision to stand up to this bully and to base their security on a strong defense partnership with the United States. It is in everyone's interest to make this partnership work. Israel's real security problem lies elsewhere. As this crisis has clearly demonstrated, Israel has more than ample reason to be concerned about Iraq. And if anyone doubted that before, there should be no doubters today. We are working closely with the Israelis to deal with the real and most pressing threat that this crisis poses for their security, namely the threat of an Iraqi ballistic missile attack. To that end, the President has decided to provide 2 batteries of Patriot missiles with an anti-tactical ballistic missile capability under Section 506A of the Foreign Assistance Act. These systems will come to Israel out of U.S. Army stocks. Israel has acted very responsibly during this crisis, going to great lengths to avoid actions that could appear provocative or divert attention from Saddam Hussein's aggression. It has been able to do so in spite of extreme threats by Saddam, in considerable measure because we have worked with Israel over the years to maintain Israel's qualitative edge and preserve a strong deterrent. If there should be any doubt about the value of strategic cooperation with Israel, I think Israel's responsible posture today bears out the value. A secure Israel contributes to peace and stability. We will be continuing to work with the government of Israel to respond to threats to its security, security to which this administration is and will remain unshakably committed. Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to close with a reminder of the stakes that are involved in this whole crisis. We have vital national interests at stake in the Gulf. We have taken decisive actions now to defend, preserve, and advance those interests. Those actions have included the rallying of a world coalition, an unprecedented coalition, against aggression and against the broader threat to security in the Persian Gulf. This in itself is a remarkable tribute to American leadership. We have a tremendous amount at stake in the outcome here. Indeed, the whole world does. There are two fundamental questions yet to be decided. How will aggression be dealt with in the post-Cold War world? How will the United States be perceived by those who rely on us to help preserve their own security and stability? And how will a brutal dictator be allowed to get his hands on the world's economic jugular? The sales we are proposing to Saudi Arabia are an important part of our strategy for ensuring that we get the right answers to these questions. These sales will enable Saudi Arabia to deter, to better assist now in its own defense, and to improve its ability to receive reinforcing troops should that ever become necessary again. It will help ensure a close, ongoing security relationship between us. Mr. Chairman, how Iraqi aggression and the broader security questions in the Gulf are finally resolved will determine in large degree the future perception of American leadership and of our influence in ensuring the security of our friends. I thus believe that all who rely on the United States have a stake in helping ensure a successful resolution of the present crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Wolfowitz. And we'll be on the 10-minute rule. Hopefully we'll get more than one, it'll be enough so we can have more than one round. I was very struck with one sentence, Mr. Wolfowitz, when you said, quote, "We still hope there will not be a war," unquote. That seems to me rather pessimistic and a depressing statement, that we only hope there will not be a war. Are we not more sure of that, or do you feel that was properly phrased?
I hope very strongly, and I'm not a pessimist on that score, but I'm answering people who say there's no need to provide for Saudi Arabia's defense because we'll go in and eliminate the Iraqi military capability. We have no plans to do that. I think it'd be irresponsible to base our plans on the assumption that we would. I don't in any way mean to suggest pessimism at all. To the contrary.
Secondly, in connection with being in a state of war, you said technically a state of war exists between Saudi Arabia and Israel. That means, in fact, both countries are still at war with each other, does it not?
Well, I don't think Israel ever declared war. I'm not even 100% sure whether Saudi Arabia did. I'm not the legal technician here.
Well, you said it's technically in a state of war.
I know. I believe that Saudi Arabia regards itself, as most Arab countries do, as technically in that state. But if you look at its actions as opposed to that technical condition, it in fact has stayed out of virtually all the wars, and the extent to which it became slightly involved in '48 was really quite minimal.
Right, but the fact of the matter is, now, actually, I maybe law and fair, I've checked this out with other legal people. We are at war. They're not we are at war. Saudi Arabia is at war with Israel, and that's a fact of life, although not being fought vigorously or even fought at this time. You can still be in a state of war without fighting, and that's the condition.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I think that the most important thing here is what has been the reality of Saudi policy for all of these years, where, in terms of its relative non-participation in wars where Israel is concerned, that is the most critical thing, the question of Saudi policy in fact. And that's where I think I would put my emphasis, rather than on the statement that they are legally in a state of war with the state of Israel.
I appreciate your refinement there, but the facts still remain. Then another thing that bothers me is the fact that we're pouring more weapons into a pretty intense maelstrom of strife. And I have a basic reservation in my own being to the fact that we are pouring in all the weapons that we do, rather than discouraging a flow of weapons. In that regard, too, the question of whether they're offensive or defensive, I'd like to read into the record a letter addressed to the President, signed by by 14 senators, including many members of this committee, which says, "Dear Mr. President," this is President Bush, "we applaud the strong steps you've taken to confront Saddam Hussein's illegal aggression in Kuwait and to assist in the defenses of Saudi Arabia, and we welcome your efforts to carry out the resolutions of the Security Council concerning this serious crisis. We understand that the administration is considering a massive sale of advanced weaponry and equipment to Saudi Arabia because most of the weapons involved would not be in Saudi hands for several years. It seems clear that the sale has not too much to do with the current crisis. We believe that the sale of weapons, which would not be delivered in the near future, should be postponed till its effect in the unstable region has been thoroughly studied by the administration and the Congress. This seems especially important given the fact that so much has changed in the world in recent months." I won't continue to read the letter and, without objection, insert the letter in the record and say, as I say earlier, it was signed by Senators Moynihan, Sanford, Packwood, Pressler, Kaka, Lautenberg, Specter, Kennedy, Worth, Adams, Kerry, Sarbanes, Simon, and Pell. And I am concerned about that. You say conditions will be attached to these weapons so they can only be used for defensive purposes. We've seen what's happened in Cyprus, where Turkey took weapons under exactly the same terms and has been using them to occupy that unfortunate country. How would you propose that control of these weapons would differentiate?
Well, Mr. Chairman, first of all, I think that you're aware that in the case of Saudi Arabia, when we're Saudi Arabia, under the terms of that agreement, it explicitly provides that what we provide, we, the United States government, provide to Saudi Arabia is to, and here I quote, to maintain its internal security, its legitimate self-defense, or to permit it to participate in the defense of the area of which it is a part, and that it will not undertake any act of aggression against another state. That's a basic undertaking. When we issue letters of offer and acceptance for the transfer, the sale of this equipment, that undertaking, the 1951 undertaking, is again reaffirmed. It is part of the pledge that is involved. I need to say in this context there's also a certain practical reality in the sense that the sale of such equipment generally brings with it, and certainly would in this case, a continuing relationship between us and the Saudis in the sense of the flow of spare parts, the provision of expertise, including contractor personnel and the like, none of which we would be able to maintain legally were any of the commitments undertaken about the use of this equipment broken. And if we could not continue that support, then that would, let me be diplomatic and say, reduce the value of the equipment involved. But the point that I would stress here is that the Saudi record, in terms of observing these conditions, has been excellent in the past. We believe Saudi Arabia is not seeking this equipment for any purpose other than its own immediate and long-term defense, and we think that the combination of these conditions and the patent policy provides us a good handle on the problem you're citing, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, but wouldn't those same criteria apply to the conditions under which we made weapons available to Turkey prior to its occupation of Cyprus?
I think the Turkish case, you draw me on that, and I believe that in this I need to give you an answer for the record in terms of the comparison you're seeking here on the Turkish case, Mr. Chairman.
We would welcome.
I want to give you a careful answer.
Thank you. We would any answer you give us, I'm sure, will be a careful one. We would welcome the answer. The concern I have is that these weapon systems that we're turning over, making available to the Saudis, it's perhaps some of them a little bit more on the aggressive than the offensive than the defensive side. And I realize that you have a difficulty here. When is a weapon offensive? When is it defensive? It's like when is an individual person a freedom fighter or a terrorist? Depends how you look at it. But in this case, it would seem to me that the M1A2, the Abrams, and the Apaches, and the launched rocket systems might be more on the offensive side than the other weapon systems there. I was wondering how you would respond to that thought.
Senator, there's no
More
way...
offensive, not defensive.
When you get into the area of armored warfare, I'd say that the distinction depends a lot on quantities. There's no way you can defend against the kind of armored threat that Iraq poses to Saudi Arabia without systems like the Abrams tank and the Apache. You simply can't do it with light infantry, and that's why we were, in fact, so concerned during the first couple of weeks of Desert Shield when all we had there was light infantry. We were pretty well protected early on from air attack because the Saudi air capabilities were not negligible, and our own Air Force got in there very quickly. But until we had some heavy forces of our own on the ground, we were very vulnerable. You've got to have some to defend, and the quantities we're talking about, I don't think, represent an offensive capability.
I would want to get on to the question of the impact upon Israel and how we make sure there's an equality there, but I'll just save that for my next round. My time has expired. Senator Mack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And maybe I'll touch on that qualitative question myself, but before I do that, I want to, I'd be interested in expanding on your thoughts, and both of you can respond to this if you'd like, but it's particularly in response to Mr. Wolfowitz's comment that no plans to eliminate Iraqi military capability. I want you to expand on that a little bit for me, because one of the concerns that I think a lot of people have is seeing a conclusion to the Desert Shield operation as an Iraq with Saddam Hussein, with his present military capability and with time to expand that capability both in the sense of chemical, biological, and nuclear abilities. And so I want you to expand on that, because that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable as to what we're all about over there.
Okay, the key is the word eliminate. I mean, I think the President made it clear when he spoke to the joint session of Congress that we are very concerned long-term about that Iraqi military capability, and particularly the nuclear and chemical biological side of that. And I'm not in any way suggesting that we would consider it tolerable for him to, after this crisis, to retain those levels of weaponry. If we can resolve this crisis peacefully, I would hope through some kind of international action and arms embargoes and the like that we're able to reduce the size of his forces. Maybe we can even get a regime in Iraq that will see the wisdom of doing so voluntarily through some kind of arms control regime. It's got to become smaller. My only point in the context of this sale is that the Iraqis, you could cut the Iraqi force by 80%, and the Saudis would still need some capability to defend against it. It will still be formidable, even at 20% of its present size.
I really don't have any difficulty with that part of it, but I find myself, my imagination stretched to some degree as to how we get to that elimination of those capabilities with Saddam Hussein still in power. But
Senator, if I may, I think we've said that there is a problem with a return to the straight status quo ante in terms of Iraqi capabilities, particularly these weapons of mass destruction that you talked about. And it is something that is going to have to be, the world's going to have to take into account in looking at any satisfactory, I think, outcome, satisfactory and durable outcome over the longer term. Now, let me just say that that on the one hand, right now, we do have a total shutdown with the sanctions, obviously, that will have its implications. both for all kinds of military capability, and in the application of those sanctions, we're paying particularly close attention to the items that could relate to nuclear, biological, chemical, missile capability in that. I think you also know that the Secretary has added Iraq to the list of terrorist states, and even after the UN sanctions were to come off, at least where the United States is concerned, those terrorists, that being on the terrorist list combined with some foreign policy controls that we're establishing will significantly broaden and tighten the controls that we will have on Iraq. In fact, I think I can tell you that the administration thinks that the current crisis should be used as a springboard for a sustained international effort to curb Iraqi capabilities, and in particularly, the non-conventional weapons of mass destruction program that's involved.
Let me just interrupt you there for a second, just to ask you, is the administration satisfied that other countries in the world are doing everything that they can, let's talk about it in a post situation, to curtail the flow of any kind of supplies that would fit into any of those three categories that I mentioned? Is everything being done today to see that that possibility is eliminated?
I can't tell you that we are ready to say that every nation in the world is doing what we think needs to be done to curtail that capability. What I can say is that in the year or two preceding the Iraqi invasion, there was some very important progress made in the international community, and I think that the United States was an important engine in it, in the development of these kinds of controls, and particularly with regard to Iraq. But a lot more is going to have to be done, and as I said, I think we should all regard the current crisis we do as a springboard for getting it done in this area, particularly with reference to Iraq.
But let me just add, I mean, the current crisis brings one major benefit, and that is the UN sanctions have so completely closed down sales to Iraq that as far as we can detect, none of that kind of stuff is going there now. It's of all the things we look for, and when it comes to sanctions violations, it would be that kind of thing that would be the subject of greatest concern, and we have seen no violations in that area so far.
And Senator Mack, if I could just add one more point on this. It isn't always easy to get the kind of international cooperation that you might want or I might want in closing this down, but if you look at the international cooperation that we have gotten in the case of Iraq in this current crisis, we think it's a pretty strong basis for a real cooperative effort to get at this problem of non-conventional weapons in Iraq afterwards. We think there'll be considerable support for it.
Okay, I want to move now to the question of Israel and the qualitative edge. We've heard that commitment, and I appreciate that commitment on the part of the administration to maintain the qualitative edge for the state of Israel. Maybe the first question is it proper to assume that Israel would probably be under greater risk today than it was a year ago with respect to what's happening in the Middle East?
With one important exception, the answer is no. I mean, the exception concerns missile attack, and clearly the Israelis are, I think, absolutely right to be concerned about the threats that Saddam has made, that if there's a war, conceivably, even if there's not a war, he's going to attack Israel with missiles, and that's a frightening threat, and that's very real. In terms of the kind of military threat that the Israelis are most worried about, some kind of Arab coalition of ground armies invading Israel, that threat is, in fact, at least for the time being, almost eliminated. The Iraqis have their entire ground force in the south and east facing the United States. The Syrians are now not, instead of reinforcing the Golan Heights, are moving forces to the Persian Gulf. So from that, you have to divide it into those two pieces. But the ballistic missile threat's a very real one. We've been working with them very hard. Longer term, they will correctly point out that's fine to talk about how the Iraqi army is diverted in the south now, but we have to think about what happens after this crisis if he emerges with his military intact and decides to turn it on us. And that gets you into questions of Israel's longer-term resource requirements and whether they can maintain the forces they need to have with resources that are declining in real value as inflation eats into the value of that 1.8 billion. That's a longer-term consideration.
I am certainly no military expert, and so I can't go through this list of the military hardware that is going to be sold in this sale, and wouldn't be able to make a judgment with respect to a future sale at this point. But I would be interested in your comments as to whether you feel is there anything in this sale that you believe affects the qualitative advantage of Israel?
I think that the answer to that, Senator, is clearly no, in the sense that we answered that question taking into a whole range of factors, not only the purposes that the nation we're giving the material to, in this case Saudi Arabia, the problems it faces, the relationship we're going to have with it, but also on the Israeli side, Israel's own capabilities, the past supply relationship we've had with it, the continuing relationship we expect to have, and the fact that that Israel has considerable advantages in on the one hand, the intangibles, where the performance and leadership of its people are concerned, things like command and control and the like, so that we're satisfied that on that basis, on a straightforward and technical basis, that this sale does not.
Then let's go to what's been taken out of this sale that was originally proposed, and what kind of qualitative or what kind of impact does that have on the qualitative equation?
Well, basically, the things that were taken out were things that are longer-term arriving items for the most part, and they primarily aircraft, some F-15s, some tankers.
What kind of F-15s?
F-15Fs. And I think we come to basically the same judgment about them, although I think there is some recognition that air forces are the most flexible kind of military power and the ones that probably cause the greatest potential concern. But as a matter of fact, we specifically ruled out the F-15E in looking at the total package.
The second phase of the package is going to include systems and armor and air defense systems, much like those that are included in the phase that we have before you today, plus some additional air defense aircraft of the F-15 variants, probably the F. We have not taken any decision to sell the F-15E, the ground attack variant.
Thank you very much indeed. Senator Cranston.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have a general statement I wish to make before I get to questions with you, and I welcome your testimony today. This proposed sale poses more questions than it answers, leaving me with doubts about the wisdom of proceeding with such a major arms sale while the situation in the region is so very volatile. Although I've been very clear in stating that we should send the Saudis whatever they need to respond to the crisis, it seems to me that the crisis is providing an excuse to send the Saudis much more. Key items in the so-called emergency package would not arrive in Saudi Arabia until 1993, long after we hope that this crisis will be resolved. As a longtime voice of caution on arms sales generally and specifically to Saudi Arabia, I was stunned to learn that the administration had interpreted comments of support for the immediate transfer of some arms to the Saudis as a green light to proceed with a $20 billion plus package of sophisticated weaponry, one of the largest transfers of arms in our history, perhaps the largest in all history. Although the package we are now considering is supposed to be a compromise package, It's unclear to me why the transfer of more than $7 billion in sophisticated weapon systems to the Saudis, many of which had never been sent to them before, is a compromise. Yes, we must provide the Saudis with weapons for their immediate defense. We must also remember, however, that the Saudis are presently protected by U.S. forces deployed in the Gulf. Any assessment of immediate Saudi needs should be made in the light of our presence in the region. We should, of course, consider what arms in Saudi hands will make our servicemen and women less vulnerable if war comes. That, of course, is a very important part of this. Does this package truly respond to immediate needs? What are the M1A2 tanks, which have yet to be built and will not be delivered until 1993, can't be delivered before then? Or the Bradley fighting vehicles, which can't arrive in Saudi Arabia until 1992, and the proposal to upgrade the Saudi Navy's command, control, and communication systems. Surely this 5-year project is not a response to Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. The policy justifications accompanying these sales seem to me to be very slim. This effort to bolster the Saudi forces is not relevant to the crisis at hand when you take into account these aspects of the package. The Saudi military will require extensive training to become familiar with the use and maintenance of these sophisticated weapons. Saudi forces are no match for Saddam Hussein's mighty war machine, as you have made plain in your testimony. The Saudi army is smaller than the army of Yemen, its neighbor to the south. Rather, this arms sale seems to be part of some sort of a broader plan for regional security. Before we proceed, we need to have a better understanding of what the administration has in mind for the long-term security needs of the region. Above all, we should not make decisions with such long-term ramifications in a hasty fashion. If this arms sale does go forward, I am most deeply concerned about how we prevent these arms from falling into hostile hands once we leave. This is not a hypothetical scenario. The very arms we supplied to the Shah of Iran were seized first by the Ayatollah Khomeini and then by Saddam Hussein during the Iran-Iraq War. Weapon systems we sold to the Kuwaiti government are now Saddam Hussein's, they are now his, poised for use against our own forces. These include howitzers and Hawk anti-aircraft missiles. The recently dismissed Air Force Chief of Staff, Michael J. Dugan, said of the American-made Hawks now in Iraq's hands, quote, "We typically do not have any protection against Hawk missiles," unquote. That's what American servicemen and women now face. I suggest that rather than selling some of the more sophisticated items in this package to the Saudis, we lease them to them for the duration of this crisis, if we determine that it is in our best interest to provide these weapons to the Saudis. A leasing or a buyback arrangement would permit us to provide the Saudis with the systems they truly need, and yet we would control and contain control over the weapon's ultimate disposition. There are ample precedents for this approach. Lend-Lease in World War II, a buyback arrangement with Bahrain, some 70 Stinger missiles provided to that country in 1988, and as I understand it, current negotiations with Israel over some other weapon systems. I'm concerned that in the rush to move this package forward, we are creating an irreparable shift in the balance of forces in the region. Arab-Israeli tensions may have drifted off the newspaper pages. Nonetheless, these animosities are still very real. We must consider the extent to which we are degrading Israel's qualitative edge by introducing sophisticated systems to Israel's enemies. Let us not forget that, as Senator Pell pointed out, Saudi Arabia is still in a state of declared war with Israel. Secretary Bartholomew, you said we should take into account the reality of Saudi policy. Well, I presume the Israelis take into account the reality that Saudi Arabia declares we are at war with you. We should also take into account that Saudi policy has been to supply huge sums to the terrorist PLO. Crown Prince Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, the defense minister of that country, and a very important member of the ruling family, recently addressed the soldiers of the King Abed al-Aziz division as they departed for the Iraqi front. According to the Royal Saudi TV and the Saudi newspapers, Al Jazeera and Al Medina, August 23, 1990, the Crown Prince said the following: "On my way to see you, I wish my visit with you and your brethren would be a farewell visit, with the hope to see you together with your brothers at arms and your friends, soldiers of the fearless Iraq army and all the Arab armies striving to regain the plundered rights in Palestine. Unfortunately, this is Allah's will, but the hope still remains and will never die in our hearts." This top leader in Saudi Arabia referred to the Iraqi army as friends, said that he wished that the Saudi soldiers to whom he was bidding farewell were going with other Arab armies, in effect to wage war against Israel. And he said that, unfortunately, Allah's will is otherwise now. But again, to quote him, "The hope still remains and will never die in our hearts." That appears to be the reality of the long-term policies of Saudi Arabia. It seems to me that we're fueling a dangerous arms race, and in an attempt to solve one problem, we may be creating another. If we have concerns about these systems, we ought to consider ways of limiting their use. The last thing we want is to have the systems designed to protect our security being used against our men and our women overseas and against our allies. Let me start by asking this question. Do you have any explanation?
My colleague with you,
Yes.
I have a markup in the Judiciary Committee. I'm going to go there. I hope to get back. If I'm not back, I would like to submit some questions in writing to the two witnesses.
Without objection,
Thank my
sir.
colleague for yielding.
Do you have any explanation of that kind of remarks, those remarks by the Crown Prince, the Defense Minister?
Well, Senator Cranston, I'm not going to try to explain those statements, try to explain the motives of such statements that might be made, and I'm not going to seek to defend them one whit. In fact, when we hear such statements, we make known to our Saudi partners that we don't like them, simply put. At the same time, the evaluation that we make of Saudi policy, Saudi action, is not based on such public statements. It's based on the historical record of action and of Saudi action, and it is based on Saudi understanding of its own interests and as we understand them as well. So I would simply say that where these statements are concerned, they are not helpful, and we make that clear. At the same time, we do not base our view of the reality of Saudi policy and Saudi interests on such public statements.
What is the justification for including items such as the M182 tank and the Bradley fighting vehicle in this sale, since they clearly cannot be available to respond to any immediate need going over to 1992, 1993 before they can get there?
I'd go back to what I have in my prepared statement, Senator. It's basically two reasons. Number one, we'd like to get them into production right away because we have considerable efficiencies in production for our own forces that can be achieved if we add these to our line. But that by itself wouldn't be a determining factor, I suppose, if it weren't also the fact that this, as I've said several times, is the single greatest area of vulnerability. When this crisis is over and we take our forces out, we don't want to have to be exposed to that kind of vulnerability again in the future, and we don't want to have any unnecessary delay in closing it.
Thank you very much. Okay. Senator Sarbanes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I apologize, I was in another meeting and wasn't able to hear the prepared statements, but I take it I want to get a picture of the context in which this submission comes to us. Are you planning, in addition, to submit a major further arms request with respect to Saudi Arabia at the beginning of the next year?
Yes, Senator.
Well, now, what's that arms request going to look like? Or let me put this question to you. Will this arms request and that arms request, in effect, come out pretty much looking like the initial arms sale to Saudi Arabia that appeared in the press and then the administration backed away from?
In outline, yes, but, Senator, I need to say that there's time between now and then that might lead to some adjustments, and for that reason, we can't say the specific shape of the package at this point.
Well, just in rough magnitude, the size of this package is about $7 billion.
7.3.
And what do you anticipate the size of the January package as being?
It could be, to take your straightforward question to us,
Which I'm hoping to get a straightforward answer, yes.
$14 million.
$14 billion.
That's right. And that is to say, it could be the Phase 2 in outline, as we were earlier consulting up here. But I say again, Senator, that we need to retain the flexibility to make the adjustments in that package it makes sense to make between now and January.
Well, now, is it your view that you can put $21 billion of a top-line, highly sophisticated military hardware into the Middle East without affecting the balance of forces in the area?
Senator, the equipment that we're talking about that could add up to that much, and I don't want to
Actually, some of this equipment, as I understand it, is so top-line it's not even available to our forces at the moment. Is that correct?
That's not true at all.
It's not?
No.
Okay. The tanks are now currently available to our forces?
Our forces have even better tanks, yes.
Uh-huh. Okay. Go ahead, I interrupted you.
Well, I was saying, Senator, that the purpose of this sale and a subsequent sale, Phase 2, without being held to the numbers of it, goes toward the creation of a certain kind of capability on the ground out there that will be enough for immediate defense, but we don't think anyone can reasonably construe as disrupting in the balance in the sense of giving the Saudis and the Gulf states the capability to threaten neighboring states which are far bigger than they are. So that we see this as creating the foundation for a stable balance in the area, as a necessary component for a stable balance for the long haul in the area, far from disrupting the balance.
Well, what is the capacity that you see this $20 billion arms package as providing?
In the first instance, a capability by the Saudis, looking at the Saudis and the Gulf states operating together to mount the kind of initial defense capability that will drive up the cost to a potential aggressor far enough to make him think twice before he moves. And if he does, a force that's capable of delaying, buying time, while we and others, if necessary, reinforce, contribute to such a defense, and a force at the same time on the part of the Saudis and the Gulfs that enhances that backup capability by giving us a basis for the ability to work together, to move together.
Well, now, even with this package, and I'm talking about both packages because I'm having difficulty separating them in view of your clearly announced intention to come with the second package. I mean, you had a strong reaction to this $21 billion package, but the end result of that, as I've seen, is not this. It's not as though you're coming here and saying, well, now we're projecting this $7 billion package, and we think we have no plans beyond that in the near or medium-term future to make another major arms sale. You've got plans, and you're working on them to come right back with a submission of twice the size of this one at the beginning of next year. Now, even assuming those two packages, you're not going to have a capability there that would be sufficient to carry out a major defense without the introduction of U.S. and other forces, are you?
Senator, before I come to that question, I think that the administration made clear that it would be coming with a second phase package in January. I don't want to be held to the precise dimensions of that package. I'm not telling you here what that package will amount to, either in terms of dollar value or systems that are concerned. What I can say, there will be a phase 2 package. That, yes. Now, in answer to the specific question that you asked, Senator, that is correct. We don't think that we can, neither we nor the Saudis and the Gulf states in the area, think that they can build a defense, even with our assistance, that would permit them on their own to deter and defeat, if necessary, the much more populous states they are surrounded by.
Well, if that's the case, what is it you then seek to accomplish by this major transfer of power, of armaments? I mean, it would be one thing if you came in and said, if we can transfer this amount of armaments, we think that the country to which we're transferring them will be able to handle its defense needs. At the moment, they don't have them. Therefore, if they have a problem, we're required to come to their defense, and therefore we have our direct involvement. We're concerned about their defense. I mean, that's one line of approach, which seems to me to be fairly clear. That's not this situation. You're transferring a major level of armaments and still concede that we would have to come in for purposes of defense.
Senator, could I just I think maybe you came in after I made some points about what is in this package, and I think it's important to emphasize it rather than just focus on a total dollar figure. There are three big pieces in it. One piece is 10,000 tactical vehicles. It's trucks and other things. It's an enormous number, but it's a number that is not inappropriate for the extraordinary logistics conditions of this environment.
Well,
of that 10,000.
This isn't a pre-positioning package, is it?
No, it's not. It's logistic support for Saudi forces and for other Arab forces, and conceivably it would even be helpful for our own forces. Out of that 10,000, for example, there are 1,500 water trucks. Most places in the world, you don't need water trucks with an army at all. You just get water where you're at. Here you've got to truck it 200 miles through the desert to where troops are.
Mr. Wolfowitz, I'm about to lose my time. There's one question I want to put to you that because of your answer. How many of these M1A2 tanks are in the U.S. inventory?
Yeah, and I wanted to correct if I left a misimpression. We will have M1A2s before they do. We don't have them.
Well, you did leave a misimpression.
I'm sorry, and I want to correct that.
You certainly did.
We have M1A1s, which are almost the same.
We have any M1A2s in our inventory now?
We don't right now. It is the tank that is in production and that we will have before they have them.
Well, your response to my previous question, or your interjection, would certainly, I think, reasonably left the impression that we did have them.
I made a mistake, Senator.
All right. Thank you very much. Senator Robb's meeting, but Senator Humphrey just came in, and no, Senator Mack has had it. Would you defer to Senator Robb? Yeah. Senator Robb has been here from the beginning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Most of the ground that I had planned to explore has been, I think, adequately explored by previous members of the panel. I wonder if you could address the two questions that haven't been covered in the same amount of detail. One is the usual question of alternate sourcing for any of the materials that are on your request. Are there materials that can only be obtained from United States sources to fulfill the same defense needs of the Saudis on this particular list? Are all of them available in one form or another as they have been in previous requests from other nations if the United States should deny any or all of this particular request?
Equivalent systems are available from other countries. I don't think any of them are as good as ours, but the British produce very good tanks. The French, unfortunately, produce very good air defense systems. The Brazilians and others produce rocket systems like the MLRS. Trucks, obviously, you could get anywhere. I think, generally speaking, our stuff is better, but it comes, as I said, also with a lot of strings attached to it. I think if the Saudis had an aggressive intention with this stuff, they'd be buying it from other people.
Does that also apply to, and I realize we're talking in a somewhat theoretical sense at this point, to the second phase, the part that was deferred, and I recognize Secretary Bartholomew's position of not wanting to commit himself to a specific package, understandably, until it's actually submitted, and taking into account any of the comments that are made here and elsewhere about any refinement. But would that same general condition about alternate sourcing be accurate with respect to the potential elements that were not included in Phase 1?
Certainly with most of the things we're talking about, that's true, Senator. And we found, in fact, a few years ago when we turned down a Saudi aircraft purchase, they went to the Europeans for a major purchase of Tornado aircraft.
Well, just one other question, Mr. Chairman, that I think several of the questions have attempted to pin down, and I'm not sure that we either can or it may be entirely desirable, but with respect to the threat assessment for the Saudis, both now with respect to the lineup against Saddam Hussein in Iraq and any potential future conflicts, is this package and Phase 2, whatever that ultimately amounts to, are those both perceived to be almost exclusively directed toward Iraq, or what is their broader application, if you care to talk about it, in terms of other Saudi needs for their own defense purposes?
They have some air defense concerns that turned up during the previous Gulf crisis, during the Iran-Iraq war, of Iranian air attack from Iran. I'd say after what's happened now, though, the overwhelming military threat they're going to be concerned about is Iraq. It doesn't mean they don't have an eye on the Iranians to some extent in a different, more unconventional way. They're concerned about Yemen. But the reason most of this equipment would be needed would be an Iraqi threat.
Is there any other potential adversary for the Saudis that plays a significant role in this, either of these requests, if you separate them into Phase 1 and Phase 2? Besides Iraq or Iran? Or, yes. I don't think so. Although I'm not sure they would necessarily, they have in the past at least been reluctant to identify specific countries as specific threats. In fact, we were more open about identifying Iraq as a threat than they were. But I think that's changed now, given what's happened. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think most of the rest of the ground that I had wanted to explore has been covered, or anything else would not be appropriate for open session.
Thank you very much. Senator Humphrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The difficulty in all of this, of course, is that both Israel and Saudi Arabia are our allies, while at the same time, at least potentially, adversaries. Has the government of Israel made any official response, official statement in connection with this matter that's now before us, this first phase? Either may answer.
I don't think that they've made an official statement. Certainly, there have been discussions, and I would not wish to characterize for them the Israeli government's view on this matter, Senator.
There's been no official response, is that what you're saying?
I don't think that that there has been, and it depends on the form that you're taking, but in any event, I think that anything that the Israeli government would want to say on this matter would be for the Israeli government to say.
Well, my question is, have they said it to us? That shouldn't be terribly difficult to answer. Have they?
There have been expressions of concern, Senator, but I think what comes out rather quickly in the course of discussions, and we've had extensive ones with them, is more concern about the Iraqi threat should Iraq emerge from this crisis and be able to turn its forces on Israel, and a very deep concern about what they've viewed with alarm as shrinking resources on their side. And obviously this is, we've been living with our own defense resources of budgets that sometimes even appear to be increasing, but in real value are steadily going down. That 1.8 billion that Israel gets is a big number, but its real value has been declining yearly, and that, I think, is at the bottom, the heart of the concern.
What happens absent this package when finally the U.S. and other powers leave the Persian Gulf?
Well, I think that what you do if you don't go ahead with the program that we're talking about with this sale is that what you're talking about is you go back to the situation that prevailed on the 2nd of August. And I think that this goes to a question that Senator Sarbanes raised. That is to say, if you do not have some capability on the part of the Saudis in the Gulf to provide immediate initial defense, including on the ground, and if no one else is there to provide it, then you have, as you did on the 2nd of August, an extraordinarily unstable and dangerous situation in which, bluntly put, the road south to Bahrain and Dhahran was for a time open. And you're living with that kind of a situation, and it's the Saudis' decision to say that is not a situation that we wish to live with over the long haul, either through this crisis or beyond, that is in part behind their requests for our further defense support in the form of these sales.
And if we were to refuse all or most of this package, would the Saudis likely to be able to purchase similar systems elsewhere, and would they do so?
They certainly could, and I think they probably would, Senator.
And it's your view that without this package, the stability of the Gulf states would be seriously jeopardized? Is that what you're saying?
We think it's important to their stability, and frankly, we think it's important to the success of this whole enterprise that we're embarked on, which is truly of, I think, not only historic importance, but I think if we succeed, and we have to succeed, it's going to mean greater security for everybody in the region, including, I think, Israel.
What about the danger of these weapons ultimately falling in one country or another, ultimately falling into hostile hands?
It's not something to dismiss entirely. We've seen weapons, for example, fall into hostile hands in Kuwait. For the most part, some of that experience, I think, bears out the fact that you can't, for example, operate a sophisticated system like a Hawk missile without American technicians. We've been looking very carefully at those missiles for obvious reasons. We see no sign whatsoever the Iraqis are able to operate them. It's a risk, but frankly, the risk of an Iraqi invasion of Saudi Arabia is much, much greater, and if the Iraqis were to succeed in Saudi Arabia in doing what they did in Kuwait, I think we'd have to worry about an awful lot more than just whether we lost some tanks. The purpose of the tanks is to prevent that from happening, and I think it can contribute significantly to doing so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I think we've all had a first round except Senator Pressler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I might just pursue one thing. I know it's been covered to some extent, but the theory is that if we increase the level of arms in that region of the world, the other countries there will seek to acquire an equal level. And now, if we made the sale to the Saudis without doing something for the Israelis, would the sale place Israel forces at a qualitative disadvantage currently?
I think you've got to look at the Israeli thing in a larger context, and we're constantly doing things for the Israelis, as we should be, because we take very seriously that commitment to their qualitative edge. We're not, the President, I think, Senator, you came in after I made the point, the President just a few days ago made the decision to take 2 Patriot fire units out of our Army stocks and give them to Israel to help meet the danger posed by Iraqi missiles in this immediate crisis. We, of course, provide Israel with $1.8 billion every year in foreign military sales credits. With those credits and with their own money, they've purchased some of our most advanced military equipment, including F-15s, F-16s, Apache helicopters. They've used some of our money to develop and produce sophisticated systems of their own, such as the Merkava tank. We've got a host of cooperative agreements that codify our strategic relationship with Israel, including in areas like logistics and exercises and planning. Israel was, I believe, the first foreign country to join in the SDI program and remains the largest foreign participant. And the Arrow anti-tactical ballistic missile program that we conduct with Israel is precisely designed to meet one of the most severe threats that it faces. I could go on. I mean, we are constantly looking at Israel's needs, but I have to stress what drives Israel's needs is countries like Iraq, not primarily what Saudi Arabia has, and I don't think it should be looked at in a one-for-one
Let me ask you
matching.
let me ask you this question about the peace process in the Middle East. I remember at the time of the AWACS sale, that was many years ago, that's ancient history, but there was indications that Jordan would join the peace process, that Saudi Arabia would be very supportive of the peace process. Now, what steps have the Saudis taken? What constructive contributions recently, if any, has Saudi Arabia made to the Middle East peace process?
Well, I think that what we can say on that is that the Saudis ultimately were supportive where the Egyptians were concerned in terms of Camp David and in terms of Egypt's reemergence afterwards. That's very important. I think we can also note that the Saudis have not been active in past efforts against the Israelis and have not been in the forefront of radical positions vis-a-vis the Israelis. We'd like to see the Saudis do more, Senator, if that's what the question is. We'd like to see all of the Arab states do more in this regard. It's something we'll be pressing.
Now, if you covered this earlier, I'll read it in the record. Israel indicates that Jordanians are training Iraqis on the U.S.-made Hawk anti-aircraft system captured from Kuwait. Can you confirm that report?
Well, Senator, we have assurances from the highest levels of the Jordanian government that that is not happening, and we don't have any collateral information that would lead us to question those assurances.
Now, has Jordan been sharing reconnaissance missions along the Saudi and Israeli borders?
We've got you mean that information with Iraq?
Yes.
Yeah. We have assurances from the Jordanian government that that is not happening.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. A couple of questions, if I may. First, what threats other than from Iraq does Saudi Arabia face in the Near East?
Well, I think that you have to It's for the Saudis to define their threats in the first instance, but sitting in Riyadh and living in that part of the world, you see a much more populous state to the north that has now invaded a neighboring state. You see an even more populous state just across the Gulf, which has gone through some hard times and engaged in a major war with the state to your north. And I think what you do is you do what the Saudis are trying to do, and that is to beef up some of the capability that you've got for the long haul in that uncertain situation.
This presumes a stability of the government in Saudi Arabia, does it not?
What presumes?
The way we have aligned ourselves with her and the support we're giving her weapons program.
Well, obviously, Mr. Chairman, we wouldn't be going ahead if we didn't think that there was some reason to believe in the durability of the friendship with the Saudis,
right,
and with this Saudi regime. So it is true in that regard.
Is there any way of being assured the Patriot systems will get to them in time? You say we've already given 2 of the units from our stock.
You mean to Israel?
To Israel? No, to Saudi Arabia.
No, the 2 Patriots that we have just used the 506A emergency drawdown authority for are for Israel.
I see. They've already been turned over.
No, they will be turned over, though, within the next 90 to 100 days, where they will come out of Army stocks. That is the time period that's prescribed by the use of that authority, and we'll certainly have it done within then.
Now, if you have the authority and go ahead with your program, will you have Patriot units available to turn over immediately to Saudi Arabia?
The 6 Patriots that we're talking about here in terms of turnover are already in country. They are in our forces, and they would be turned over to Saudi Arabia when we leave. But in the interim, the sale of them would permit training and other preparations to be made by the Saudis where those systems are concerned.
Do the Saudis have the technical ability to maintain and run those systems?
The Saudis have demonstrated the ability to fly F-15s, AWACS, and to operate a force like that. We think that they will have the technical capability, yes. It will require, as much else, many other of these systems do, some backup, spare parts, and contractor personnel assistance. That is true.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask one more brief question?
Certainly.
Whoever's next.
Go
ahead. Could these items be leased to Saudi Arabia rather than sold, so in case the problem went away, we could take them back?
Well, Senator, there's a question as to what you get with leasing. I think that if the purpose of leasing is in the first hand to give you more control over the system, we're not sure in practical terms that this is the case. I mean, in the first instance, I cited earlier when you had not yet arrived, Senator, the arrangements that we have under the Mutual Defense Assistance Agreement of 1951, the commitments that are signed on the use of that equipment, and a lease arrangement wouldn't give us any greater restrictions on the use of this equipment than we already have in those kinds of existing agreements. Moreover, the practical hold that we have where these systems are concerned, to where any country is that needs backup is concerned, does come from the spare parts, the flow of spare parts, the continuing relationship that's required that I referred to earlier, where contractor personnel is concerned. And in that sense, a lease arrangement sort of the only additional thing that it would give you, I guess, would be some greater, more certain legal or diplomatic basis, as opposed to concrete hold, physical hold, or practical hold in getting the equipment back. We're not sure how practical that would be in a real sense, how usable that would be in a real sense. As I say, I think it's the support that counts the most. I would note, going back to one question that was raised earlier about the need for logistical support, that a number of Iranian of F-4s and F-14s that remained in Iran after the change in regime, and they were unable to fly those aircraft after we shut off precisely the kind of logistical support, spare parts and the like that I was talking about.
Thank you very much, Senator Sarbanes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The Senator yields to me to follow up on the question just asked.
Surely, surely.
If we did a lease back or a buyback or release arrangement, would not that give us one right, which would be to take back the weapon when it was no longer needed, thereby reducing the danger it might fall into hands antagonistic to us or be used against allies of ours?
Senator, it would give us, yes, that legal diplomatic right. Exercising it in the real world would be another question.
Are you suggesting that the Saudis wouldn't live up to the agreement and give them back when we wanted them?
I thought, Senator, you were talking about an Iranian-style situation in which you had a total turnaround. I mean, you're talking about the loss of, I think you're talking about a situation such as Iran in which there's a loss of equipment to a hostile regime.
I'm talking about a situation where we lease or have a buyback arrangement on provision of weapons to Saudi Arabia with the understanding when the crisis is over, when the UN and we determine there's no longer a crisis, we have the right to take back the weapons if we wish to get them out of there.
I see. In that case, well, you're addressing another purpose here. Well, what we would say is we think that Saudi interests and our interests in the Gulf are long-term, that there will be a long-term need to have a more stable balance out there, to not go back to the situation that prevailed on August 2nd. The Saudis don't want to, and they're not going to, and if they don't get this equipment from us, they'll get it from someplace else, so that the equipment that we're talking about does not relate solely to the immediate crisis, but to creating a situation that would prevent it from ever happening again.
Well, it would seem to me it would relate to the issue of whether or not we're going to be able to do something about Saddam Hussein's long-term strengths after we get him out of Kuwait and back to Baghdad. And if that threat is reduced by whatever means, then the need for those weapons in Saudi arms or Saudi hands may well be reduced. Why did we provide weapons, the Stingers, to Bahrain under this kind of an arrangement? Wasn't the purpose to get them back when we wanted them back?
The short answer, Senator Cranston, is the administration didn't think that it was a good idea, but in fact it was a requirement that was established where that sale of that one system was concerned.
Well, I guess Congress thought it was a good idea, and Congress might decide this was a good idea. I think.
Senator, if I might add, I think the most optimistic views of how much Iraq may reduce its armed forces over the long term are not going to make 3 Saudi armored brigades excessive. I mean, we're not talking about a large Saudi force, and I can't imagine, especially given the other options available to them, that they would invest their money in an area as fundamental to their security as this in an arrangement where it was simply on a lease terms. Secondly, I'm not quite sure even how you could manage that financially and who would bear the cost of the lease. I mean, somebody's got to buy the equipment if it is to be leased, and not even sure we have the legal, much less the financial arrangements to do that kind of thing.
Well, Bahrain agreed to such an arrangement, and we worked out the finances. I thank Senator Sarbanes for yielding time. I suggest he take the full 10 minutes and my time be reduced accordingly when it comes to me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My understanding was that there was in effect a story that came out of the administration about the plan to sell over $20 billion worth of weaponry to Saudi Arabia a few weeks ago, and that list encompassed virtually everything that had at any time been considered for sale to the Saudis. I mean, there was a kind of an indulgence with respect to the wish list, if not by the Saudis, certainly by the people in the Pentagon. Is there anything to that perception?
Senator, we did, and you would be, if I may say so, the first one to ask us to do this, try to step back, look at, yes, the immediate crisis, but also the longer term, and say, what kind of a situation should it be our policy to create?
Well, all right. I take it that means yes.
What that
on the
meant-
$21 billion. Now, let
No,
me
it
ask you-
doesn't mean yes on, I'm not going to say on any particular figure, but as we said, we did develop a program, and we're coming now with phase 1 of it. Phase 2,
All right, now let me ask you the rationale of phase 1. I take it your rationale is that you've put into phase 1 all those systems that you think are pertinent and relevant to the current crisis. In other words, you're looking ahead to the short and medium term, and you took this $20 billion kind of wish package, anything that anyone in the Pentagon had been working on, and you looked at that and you said, now wait a second, we're getting some problems with respect to this. And you then put together a package whose rationale, amongst other things, embraces anything that's pertinent and relevant to the current crisis. Is that correct?
if you let me say it's not correct on the $20 billion figure, not correct that the list was a wish list, yes.
The balance of that is correct.
That is to say
Okay.
that
Now, let me ask
we
you-
looked at at immediate needs.
What's your definition of immediate?
I mentioned, I think, before you came in, Senator, in my opening statement, that we had 3 criteria: items that could be delivered within a short period to be of immediate help in the current crisis, and/or items that required immediate decisions because of production considerations like the M1.
Yeah, I see that, page 7 of your statement.
Correct.
Yeah, I've read that.
And/or, okay. Those were the criteria. Many items come under more than one of these criteria.
All right. Well, now, why are you going to come at us with another package, literally in a time frame that is so short that it essentially constitutes part of this package?
Well, the consideration that we heard from many of your colleagues, both here and on the House side, was that there was not enough time in the present cycle to consider the size of what we were talking about.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
we are not.
No, I'm taking you in the other direction. I absolutely agree with that. I'm now pressing you as to why you're even thinking of giving us another package in January, I assume, January or February, right at the beginning of the next Congress?
That's what we would assume, yeah.
Yeah, why you're even considering doing that? Why aren't you in here trying to say, given the problems that have been raised with this package, well, look, this is the package. I mean, we may not agree with you. We may have some differences on this score. But it seemed to me that a minimum, the administration's position ought to be, well, this is the package we are seeking to address this crisis. And if someone says, well, are you coming with another package in January? You say, no, we're not coming with another package. We had this big wish list. Everyone in the Pentagon who'd ever worked on the sale of military equipment to Saudi Arabia sent in their memo to the central office, and we collected all of that, and we had memos that added up to well over $20 billion worth of weaponry, and that's sort of what got out, but that wasn't what we were thinking about. And this is what we were really thinking about. And if we can, this is our package, and if we get this package, well, you know, we're not going to have another package for as in the foreseeable future. I mean, we just don't. This is addressing immediate needs, as you in fact try to assert as a rationale in your statement. But instead, what I'm being told is, well, here's this package, And we got the other package, and that one's cooking, and that's going to be on your desk in 2 or 3 months' time. So I look at this thing and I say, well, you know, there aren't two separate packages or a different rationale. It's the same old approach that provoked the very deep concerns. Now, why are you coming with another package in January?
Senator, because what's happened in the Persian Gulf has fundamentally transformed the security situation there, and we have got to take a long-term look at it. If we'd gone through the process of asking everybody with some idea to come up, we could have come up with a number much bigger than 20 billion. We are dealing with a very massive security threat to a very vital interest of ours, in which we want the maximum amount of help in protecting it.
Well, now,
and I think it's
all right,
incumbent on us to take a long-term view. We heard the concern of the Congress.
I take it your long-term view for the Middle East does not encompass any possibility that the level of armaments in the area might in fact be reduced.
No, it does. Go ahead.
Well, if that's the case, why are you proposing not only to put in $7 billion, which you assert is necessary to meet the immediate crisis, but to follow that with twice that much within 2 or 3 months?
Because, Senator, when Iraq outnumbers Saudi Arabia by 10 to 1 or 8 to 1 in many categories, we can hope to achieve a much better balance at lower levels and still want to see more on our side.
But, Mr. Wolfowitz, you haven't, look, I told you earlier, if you said to me, if we can sell the $20 billion to Saudi Arabia, we will not have to put in American forces to defend Saudi Arabia. If you were making that assertion to me, I would have to say, well, now that's a very serious rationale they're laying down. In other words, we have this problem. We have heavily arming Saudi Arabia, which creates other potential threats in the area, which we would be concerned about if they should happen. But on the other hand, they're telling us if we do this, it will not be necessary to use American forces for defensive capacity. You're not telling me that. You can't begin to tell me that this morning, and you know that. You know that. All you're saying to me is that it will raise the level of deterrence somewhat, and it will provide maybe, I think there's somewhere in here, isn't it, a few days? Is that the, do you ever quantify it in time terms? No. It's been, I've seen stories elsewhere coming out of the administration of that effect. So you don't have the rationale that if you can make these sales, and I'm talking about both sales now, that if you can make them, in effect, Saudi Arabia will be able to defend itself.
Senator.
So we're left then with a situation that the U.S. will have to, in effect, come in, just as we did. If the Saudis had had the $7 billion that you're trying to sell them right now, on in August, would we have had to put in American forces into Saudi Arabia?
We would have been much less afraid about the safety of those forces in the first 2 weeks if we'd had this.
But we would have had to put them in, right?
Correct, but they would have been safer and more secure.
Okay, so now we're getting, I think, beginning to get to the rationale, and I want to see whether it can be addressed in a different way than what you're trying to do here. Now let me read to you from your statement. Page 5. This standardization on U.S. equipment also promotes the ability of local armed forces to operate more effectively with U.S. units should reinforcement of the region be needed again in the future. Page 6. The force we and the Saudis have in mind would then be able to operate effectively with U.S. and allied reinforcements and to provide capabilities such as fire support and heavy armor that we would not be able to lift quickly from the United States. Page 4, I'm sorry, I skipped over that right at the outset. Page 4, the bottom, and work with the countries in the region to improve our ability to send and their ability to receive reinforcements in the future, and to operate effectively together in a combined defensive operation. My question to you, isn't there some other way you can take care of the pre-positioning problem?
Senator, it's not a prepositioning package that we have here. Can I back up in terms of the sketching out again the concept of what we're trying to talk about? I don't know, maybe if we had had the kind of force capability that we would like to build where Saudis and the Gulf states are concerned, we wouldn't have faced the 2nd of August in the first place. Maybe if we'd had that kind of capability that we'd like to have built up, maybe if Saddam Hussein were looking at that capability and looking at the backing behind it, the enhanced capability of the United States to operate with that force on the ground, maybe he wouldn't have come into Kuwait. I don't know, but certainly one thing that we do know is that they got to do more in their own defense. They've got a role to play in their own defense. We do not want the United States looking to the long term as a long-term proposition to have large forces deployed on the ground to perform that initial blocking function, or any forces deployed, substantial forces deployed on the ground to perform that blocking function. So that in effect what we're trying to do is create a situation where that is done by the states that properly should do it, the people who were there, with us in a backup role, but in a better and more secure fashion than we had in place on the 2nd of August.
Let me ask you this question. Would you give me some time?
If I could, if I could just ask a couple of questions. It won't take the full 10 minutes, and then yield back my time to the Senator from Maryland. Would that be all right, or are you going to conclude this discussion?
I wanted to do just one follow-up question, if I could. Leaving aside the differences we have over this package before us, which have been raised by myself and others, what is lost, or what would be taken away from the administration's approach if the administration were to say, well, we are not going to have a follow-on package? We're saying to you, gentlemen, we have, by our own analysis, we have put into this package what we think is, trying to find the very language you use, I don't know, is pertinent and relevant, immediate help in the current crisis, immediate decisions because of production considerations, important to close urgent vulnerabilities that would be created by the withdrawal of U.S. forces. So you're obviously anticipating something in the future. What would be lost if the administration said we don't have a follow-on package? We're not planning to submit to the Congress in the next session a $14–15 billion follow-on package. What would be lost from your point of view?
Well, what would be lost simply is that we cannot tell you that this package as it stands does the job that the Saudis and the Gulf states and we think needs to be done looking in this crisis and beyond in terms of the kind of situation to be created out there. We can't say this package does it. And we can't say it not just because we have more requests, Saudi requests than are met here, or Gulf state requests than are met here. We can't say it in terms of our own assessment of the kind of situation we'd like to move to over the longer term. Now, Senator, what I can say to you is I can't tell you at this point exactly what will be in Phase 2, in what we will be coming with. I can't tell you at this point, put any dollar level on it. I don't want to do that. I don't know. I would have difficulty, in fact, doing that at this point. But it would be frankly not in keeping with our own view of the requirements of the system, of the situation we want to create, for us to tell you that this package does it all. We don't think it does.
Thank you very much, Senator Mack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And there was something gnawing at me earlier, and I couldn't quite figure out how to articulate it until I heard you make the comment, Mr. Bartholomew, that it's up to the Saudis to determine their threat. And I think that that's a rather logical statement, but what triggered in my mind as a result of that goes back to the questions I was raising with respect to Israel. I would assume that Israel has made some determination about its threat, both from the standpoint of what this crisis in the Gulf means to them short term, what it means to them long term, and what the situation may be after the sales have taken place, assuming that they do. And I guess the question that I would raise at this point is, have they presented to you what they believe that threat to be, both short and long term?
Yes, we've had...
What has been your reaction to that request? Does it meet their anticipated needs? If it does not, why not? And
we've had a number of talks with the Israelis at different levels over this question. In one sense, the Patriot decision that the President took to provide the 2 Patriots under the 506A drawdown is an effort to meet what is an obviously very urgent, very immediate requirement. And that is why we use the 506 Emergency Drawdown Authority. That is to say, the air defense threat, with the capability that Patriot has as well to counter tactical ballistic missiles. There may be other steps that to be taken in the immediate, other requests where immediate requirements are concerned that we will want to do, but we need to look at those further. Those are under examination. We haven't taken any decision on those. But looking beyond that, there is the longer-term problem that Paul Wolfowitz referred to in terms of what will be required over the long term to continue to maintain Israel's qualitative edge.
Will it be, is it your opinion then that when you come back with a second package for the Saudis, that you will be addressing a second package for Israel, taking into consideration their determination of their threat and their concerns long term?
I'm not saying that we may not take some decisions where Israel is concerned beyond Patriot until January or February. I mean, we may decide, as we review Israeli requirements, that more is concerned is required sooner than that. So that I'm not tying taking further steps where Israel is concerned to a January package, Senator, if I understood that.
All right, well then let me say it a different way. What you are saying is that you are still considering Israel's long-term needs as a result of what has happened in the Gulf region during the last several months. Is that?
Yeah, that's fair to say, but also some more immediate requirements that we might be able to meet as we look at such things as excess defense articles, availability, and that kind of question. But I don't want to get out ahead of the story in terms of what the possible might be or what the administration will be able to decide in that regard.
But what you are leading me to believe is that there is the potential, and it sounds like fairly high potential, that within a relatively short period of time, you're going to be back talking about the long-term needs for Israel.
If Paul and I said that to you, then it is not what we meant to say, Senator, in terms of coming back. Because
then you're telling me that you're not coming back with the.
I think I'm going to head for the roundhouse, so I can't be cornered, Senator. Now, I mean, it is a question. I mean, focusing on, yes, some immediate requirements, but also trying to be sensitive to what the longer-term requirements will be. But part of that problem is what the long-term financial environment is going to be where the United States is concerned and what our budget possibilities are involved, where our budget possibilities are concerned. It may be that straight money isn't the answer in terms of the appropriation obligation, more funds. It may be that the future lies more in in other facilities, such as actions we've taken where Patriot is concerned, excess defense articles, those kinds of things. But I'm getting, as I say, much more ahead of the story than I think it's probably wise for me to do so at this point.
Well, I will make one more comment, not trying to push you too far out in front of the story, but it sounds like what you were saying now then is that there have been requests made that are both of a short and long-term nature, that there has been a recognition on our part of these new threats to Israel's security. Some of those we've been able to respond to at this point, but because of financial considerations, budget concerns, we have not been able to respond to those requests as much as we would like to at this time.
That's correct.
Senator, that's close enough.
Okay.
Because of those considerations, we have heightened the risk to Israel's security.
No, not in the longer term. I'm talking about a longer term problem as we look out. In the immediate situation, part of the reason why we went quickly where patriots are concerned, Senator, was because of our own sense of, took the unusual step that we did, was because of our own sense of the heightened risk to Israel in this current situation.
Well, I understand, but as I take it, you see a potential risk here which leads you to concede that they need a strengthened arms support, but you're restrained from doing so because of budgetary considerations. Is that correct?
Well, I think, again, to try to break it in, it's that the question is what Israeli immediate requirements are that relate, more or less to the immediate situation. That's where the Patriot decision falls. There may be some other things in that category. But then looking out beyond that, there is the continuing problem that the Israelis have broached with us about the longer-term trend in terms of the balance in the Gulf and what the implications might be for their own forces and the impact of inflation and the like. That's something we keep under.
But I understood your response to Senator Mack to be that you recognize that a follow-on package to the Saudis in the dimensions of $15 billion might raise legitimate security concerns in Israel about sustaining their equipment at a sufficient level, but that you weren't prepared to indicate you would consider such a package because you were constrained by budget considerations.
Senator, what drives our sense of Israel's long-term security concerns is not our sales to Saudi Arabia. It's the size of the Iraqi threat and potential other more immediate ones. And in fact, in the immediate crisis, with the exception of the ballistic missile threat, I think most of the other threats to Israel have been reduced precisely by our action in the Persian Gulf. What we have been sensitive to now for some time is the impact of declining real resources, and we've done a lot of things over the last 12 months to try to stretch those Israeli defense dollars and find ways of making them go further. And the President's decision on Patriot is an example of that. He took it out of Army stocks, and we're giving it to Israel. We're not taking it out of Israel's own resources, and we'll be looking for other ways to make those defense dollars go further. But we really do not believe that what we're doing to improve the security of Saudi Arabia is what's driving Israel's defense requirements.
Well, but it has some impact on it.
I think it's pretty marginal, Senator.
In apprehending a potential danger. You've not given me this morning, I have to say to you, any rationale that I can understand for why you're even considering a follow-on package. You've given me some rationale for this package, some of which I agree with and some of which I may disagree with. But you've given me no rationale for a follow-on package, and I don't see why the administration doesn't really take the position that says, well, this package is what we think is necessary. Then we can debate that, but we don't have waiting in the wings double this package. Now, I understood your point about, well, we can't be sure that if you said to me, look, we have this package and we may have a supplemental that is 10% or 20% of this package to fill in some openings that we overlooked. But you're talking now about coming in January with a package double the size of this one, when your rationale for this one is that you're meeting that in this package is anything pertinent and relevant to the existing crisis. Now, questions have even been raised about that. And of course, your response on that is, well, they're pertinent and relevant in a production sense, not in terms of an on-the-ground sense. I mean, that's a sort of a backup rationale that is contained in your statements, I think in response in part to that kind of questioning on the part of the Congress. But I've heard no rationale for this follow-up package. What would be lost in the administration's projected policy if the administration said, no, we're not going to have another package next year? Is there anything in the package next year that's going to be delivered next year?
No, but what is lost, Senator, is our ability to have the flexibility we need to have after this crisis to get our troops out, which is something that we want to do and the countries there want to see us do. And it's longer term, but it's not long term in the sense of the next century. It's long term for which planning's got to begin now.
Well, I know, but that judgment can be made in light of what the developments are. Suppose you work all this out so there's a major effort to lower the level of arms in the Middle East. I mean, you're now talking about pumping in a huge amount of arms, not only in this package, but double this amount in your follow-on package.
Senator, we are not telling you that the Phase 1 package will be double this package. That Phase 1 package, that the Phase 2 package will be double in dollar value Phase 1 package. We are not telling you that at this point. We are not telling you precisely what content it will have. We've said specifically that this is what we need to work on. What we are telling you is there will be a Phase 2 package.
And you're telling me there's nothing in that Phase 2 package that is going to be out on the ground in the next year?
From as near as I understand it today, right now, that's the case. But we've got between now and January, February when we come to you, in which events and other looks may alter that. But we are telling you we will be coming with you. The basic thing we are saying is we will be coming with you with the Phase 2 sale. And the basic rationale for it is because we don't think that this Phase 1 in and of itself puts into place the kind of local defense capability that we think is going to be required for the long haul.
Well, then what you do by doing...
No, he can have my time. Keep going.
Okay.
I just make this observation. What you do by that position is you require then a judgment with respect to Phase 1 to be made in the context of Phase 2. I don't know why you're advancing that rationale. It seems to me not smart on your part, and it seems to me to heighten the potential dangers associated with all of this with respect to developments in the Middle East. And I thank the Senator for... No, I've finished it. I mean, we don't have a rationale for Phase 2, and I can't understand why it continues to lurk in the wings.
I apologize to my colleagues. I've been chairing the Judiciary Committee along with the Senator from Illinois, so I don't know. Are you up next? No, I will wait. The Senator from California.
It seems to me that the administration is closing its eyes to the fact that all the nations we're talking about, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, are sworn enemies of Israel and could renew hostilities against Israel at any time as a united front, as they did in 1948 and thereafter. The billions of dollars of sophisticated arms we're pouring in could be turned against Israel. As the Saudi prince said, deep in their hearts, the Arabs would like to do. The point is that Israel is the only real democracy in that part of the world and our most reliable and stable ally there. That's why I believe we should retain title to certain of these weapons and pull them out when the present crisis is over. Are you concerned about the fact that deadly and sophisticated weapons we sold to Iran and sold to Kuwait are now in the Iraq arsenal and aimed against our servicemen and women in the Gulf?
We are concerned about the Kuwaiti weapons, Senator. The fact is, as I said earlier, the most potent of those, like the Hawk missiles, as far as we can tell, the Iraqis can't operate them because they don't have the kind of technical support that only we could provide. Senator, no one is saying that there are no risks in what we're proposing, but there are much greater risks, I believe, and there are risks to Israel's security as well in perpetuating a situation in which Saudi Arabia is vulnerable to Iraqi attack, in which our forces, if they have to reinforce Saudi Arabia, are vulnerable for weeks to Iraqi attack. The reason we're up here talking about these things is not because somebody in the Pentagon went crazy with a wish list. It's because we have dealing with a fundamentally transformed situation in that area in which Saudi Arabia has faced up to that threat from Iraq and is now confronting it, and I think is going to have to confront it for a long time to come. This is not an enmity that's going to go away when this crisis is resolved, and I think, frankly, to add these things together and make them one threat and look only at that is not by any means to look at the most likely case. The most likely case is one of rather enduring conflict between Iraq and Saudi Arabia, in which it's in everyone's interest, including Israel's interest, for Saudi Arabia to have the security that comes from better weaponry and from a good relationship with the United States.
Were all the weapons included in the present package and prospectively to be included in the January package specifically requested by the Saudis?
Yes, they were.
When were those requests made first?
I'm not sure. I don't have the answer in my head just now. Yes, in terms of this actual package, it was discussions that began during Secretary Cheney's second visit out there in September. Some of these were things we have talked about with them over a number of years, but basically the list was put together in September.
But some of these items have been on a list before the Iraq crisis.
For very obvious reasons, yes.
Yield for just a second. What's
Sure.
the largest previous arms sales we've made to Saudi Arabia?
Tanks. Let's see if I've got the Saudi AWACS.
You try. I can get it for the record, Senator.
We
I
can
don't
get it
know.
for the record, but I'm informed that
AWACS at about at about
8.2 is what we're told.
How much?
8.2?
That was for a single system.
Yeah, 8.2 for AWACS. But let us get the most accurate. Check that for you, Senator.
Are all the weapon systems we sold to the Saudis in the last decade being deployed during the present crisis?
I can't say all of them. As I said earlier, 80% of the $57 billion in sales to Saudi Arabia has gone into logistics and construction of facilities and so forth. The very large bulk of which is not only being employed, but being employed to very good effect by our forces as well. And the biggest items of equipment, F-15s and AWACS, are being used constantly every day. I can't tell you every last item is being used, but I think we're getting good value out of it, Senator.
Is it true that some weapons we have sold to them in the past are in effect sitting in what amounts to parking lots, deteriorating in the sun?
I'm aware of some French systems that are doing that. I'm not specifically aware of ours, but I wouldn't rule out there are some.
Why is that happening with the French systems?
Because those French tanks aren't very good. They're obsolete. They wouldn't stand up very well against an Iraqi force, but also because until now, the Saudis, frankly, have not taken their army as seriously as they've taken their air force. They did recognize they had an air threat from Iran. In fact, the Iranians did stage some air raids on some of the smaller Gulf states during the last war. But I think their attitude about ground defense has been transformed by what happened in Kuwait.
Is the administration really certain that the very small Saudi armed forces contingent is capable of absorbing these massive weapons?
We feel pretty confident that they are, Senator.
How long is the thought it would take for them to be able to do so?
It's the kind of thing that builds up gradually over time. I think you start out with training, and over time they get more and more capable. One of the reasons we want to get moving on Patriot is to start that training now while our forces are there with our systems. Different of these things will, again, as with the equipment itself, the question of how long it takes to absorb is different for different items.
Which of these systems would degrade Israel's qualitative edge in the region?
I don't believe that any of the items in this package have a significant impact on Israel's overall qualitative edge vis-a-vis Arab forces, partly because I think, the most likely threats are not with these systems included. And I think even if you make the most extreme assumptions, tanks would have a very hard time getting to Israel. The one system that we have sold Saudi Arabia, and we have to sell Saudi Arabia, that causes the greatest concern for Israel are aircraft, because aircraft are so mobile, and there are no aircraft in this particular package.
I know that the administration has committed itself to the long-standing American commitment to see to it that Israel's qualitative edge is maintained despite this sale, if it goes through. But precisely how does the administration propose to do that?
Well, Senator, I don't think that I can go farther than be more specific than I was in answer to Senator Mack's question a short time ago, in the sense of we're doing Patriot immediately. We're looking at other immediate requests that the Israelis have. And in addition to that, there is, of course, the long-term aid commitment that we have met where the Israelis are concerned, both in terms of FMS, military credits, and in terms of economic support funds.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Senator Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be very brief. Unfortunately, I'm caught between other committee hearings. Just as a general principle, if I may lobby both of you here, it seems to me that we ought to be slowing the arms race internationally to the extent that we can, and specifically in the Middle East. Now, you have emergency situations that we have to deal with, but as a matter of principle, I think that's something that we ought to be striving toward and working with the Soviets and others to see that we move in that direction. Second, except for emergencies, and I recognize we are in an emergency situation in the Middle East right now, but except for emergencies, it seems to me we should make it very clear, as a matter of principle, we're not going to supply weapons to any country that doesn't join in the peace process. And then I think we avoid the embarrassment of coming up to Congress and having packages rejected. And then we make clear to the Saudis, to everyone, this is our goal. You have to understand where we stand. We want you to join in this peace process. I don't think we're nudging people strongly enough in that direction. Either one of you have any comments on either of those general principles?
Senator, I think that in terms of nudging people, I would describe the administration's efforts with a more active verb. Obviously, the Gulf crisis has its effects, and we had the effects even before that of the PLO. But what I would say is this, and I think it's an important consideration. Surely none of us can believe that it could be in Israel's interest to have a catastrophic situation in the Gulf in which a hostile power in that Gulf, any hostile power, dominated the tremendous strategic resources that are there, and I mean oil and geography and the like. I mean, that kind of situation could not by any stretch of the imagination be considered anything other than a vastly increased threat to the security of Israel. Now, we happen to think that one of the ways of heading that off is working with the Saudis. I mean, quite evident in the current situation, but it was evident before that. It'll be evident after that. Is working closely with the Saudis and the Gulf partners to create some kind of stable situations that'll head that kind of a situation off. An important dimension where that is involved is the arms relationship, the kinds of arms situation we want to continue create. That's what this goes to. None of this precludes our saying to the Saudis that we'd like to see them be more constructive in the peace process. But to go back to an old Maine or Illinois phrase, it really would be throwing the baby out with the bathwater to say to the Saudis that unless you did X, Y, and Z on the peace process, unless we can have it all with you, we don't want to have any of it. I can't believe that that would be in Israel's interest as well as ours. And this is not a cop-out, Senator, in the sense of our interest in seeing Saudi Arabia and other states be active and forthright in pursuing the peace process. And we're not going to give up on that.
Well, if I could just respond very, very briefly. My own feeling is that we're not simply saying to the Saudis, but we're saying to Jordan, we're saying to other countries, we want to get along with you. We would like a stable situation. And if we could be more affirmative in terms of getting them involved, now I think as a result of what is taking place right now, there is a possibility after we get the Iraq situation resolved that we can have an overall Middle East settlement. But I think we needlessly embarrass ourselves from time to time by our present lack of firmness in policy. Let me ask Mr. Wolfowitz just one question. I remember reading an article by a military analyst, I believe it was a British military analyst, after the Six-Day War, in which he said, what the Six-Day War has shown is that tanks are useless. They are about make as much sense in a military situation against a sophisticated opponent as the cavalry does. Was that just hyperbole on his part? Is there do tanks really make a difference in today's war in a desert where you have planes in opposition?
I don't know who this analyst was. I think the Israelis actually drew the opposite conclusion, that tanks were everything. And in fact, they found in '73 that they'd gone so far that they drew the wrong conclusion from '67. Their army was almost entirely tanks. They left out a lot of the kind of protective infantry that would otherwise go with it, and they found themselves more exposed to counterforces. My guess is, but risk of guessing, I mean, if this man felt that air power was so important in '67 that it showed tanks didn't matter, what air power was important for was basically opening the way for Israeli tanks. And I'd say the '67 war was decided by tanks, so I have a little trouble tracking that. Particularly in desert conditions that are wide open, tanks are very, very potent weapons, and if you don't have something formidable to stop them, as we didn't for the first couple of weeks of Desert Shield, you can be in very serious trouble.
Oh, thank you. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I'd like to frame this question about the effect of the package on Israel in another way. As I understand it, you have said that the administration has not yet decided on a compensating package of military assistance to Israel. So that would be correct?
It's not a question, compensation, Mr. Chairman.
Not compensation, compensating.
Compensating package, because as Undersecretary Wolfowitz has, I think, made clear, we don't see the Saudi package as aimed at Israel or requiring in its own terms a one-to-one offset where the Saudi sale is concerned. What is true is we're looking, again, being responsive to to Israeli needs in the current situation as witnessed by the Patriots, but that's not as a response to a new Saudi air threat. It's Iraq we're talking about here.
Let me phrase it differently then. Has the administration decided on a compensating package of military readiness for Israel, to Israel?
Senator, if you take out the word compensating, we're looking at a number of Israeli requests and requirements. We've already decided on the Patriot. We're going to be looking at other things.
All right, let's take out the word compensating. Has the administration decided on a package of military assistance to Israel?
What we've decided thus far is the Patriot. We are looking at other steps.
But then how do you expect Congress to pass judgment on the wisdom of the Saudi arms sale unless we know what's being done for Israel? Because the arms proposal for Saudi Arabia could obviously, under certain circumstances, add to the nervousness, the threat to Israel.
We don't see the Saudi arms package, for all the reasons we've given to this point, Mr. Chairman, as increasing the threat to Israel and therefore requiring a response to that threat where Israeli capabilities are concerned. What we're focused on is Israeli capabilities in the large, and particularly in the current situation as witnessed by the Patriot decision that we took.
Does Israel agree with you on this?
I don't think that Israel is saying to us that because you're proposing to give X, Y, and Z, that particular piece of hardware to the Saudis causes this particular problem for us, and therefore it should be met by this compensating step. What the Israelis are talking to us about is their requirements, both immediate in this current situation and longer term, and they're not those requirements aren't particularly directed against Saudi Arabia, I would say.
Good. Well, thank you. I would also ask that the record be kept open for additional questions. Senator Helms, Senator Lugar, and others who are not able to be here will have additional questions. I would now turn to Senator Biden.
Mr. Chairman, may I add one footnote on an earlier question that you asked? It concerned Turkey and Cyprus.
Right.
I would not wish to have left with you the impression that we believe that there was a question of a violation of United States restrictions by Turkey. That has not been the view of the United States government, but I will provide, as I say, an answer for the record on this. There is the special dimension of Cyprus that I will, and I think I had better provide that for the record.
I appreciate knowing your views. It certainly would be the view of this senator, and I think many of us on the Hill, so we must agree to strongly disagree on that. Senator Biden.
Thank you very much. I know you've been here a long time, gentlemen, and again, I do apologize, but I was chairing another committee, and let me ask you just a few questions, because many of the questions I wanted to ask, I am sure must have been asked, and I will read the record. Last week, or not last week actually, in early September, the Secretary of State indicated that when this crisis, that is the crisis involving the presence of Iraqi troops in Kuwait, is settled, that there may be a need for at least discussion about a regional agreement to ensure the stability of the Middle East. And since then, understandably, I think understandably, we've heard little about that. You've been awfully busy. But I'd like to ask you this. Is the administration's thinking relative to the size and configuration of this package in any way related to notions or ideas it has about future regional arrangements? And if so, could you tell me, General?
Senator Biden, I said in my opening remarks that we do need more planning, more consultation in terms of the shape of the post-crisis security arrangements that we want in the Gulf area. That said, we think that the kind of situation that we are trying to contribute to by this sale, we and the Saudis, in terms of capabilities on the ground, the whole defense concept that it implies, will probably be in a central figure in any event as a central component in whatever the shape of the broader shape of the security arrangements that are made out there. In other words, you're going to need some kind of stable balance, and that's what this goes toward trying to create.
Now, in light of the particular weapons and capability that you are proposing to sell now, and those which are likely to come forward in January, are they designed to, what sort of defense capability are they designed to provide the Saudis with? Or put another way, Mr. Wolfowitz, Mr. Secretary, you made reference to there is a relationship between American troops coming home after the crisis and Saudi capability being beefed up. I assume that's what you meant. Now, are you contemplating that after the total sale contemplated here, that the Saudis would be able to, for example, defend themselves against the Iraqis, assuming the Iraq is still intact after this? I don't mean that facetiously. I mean, assuming Iraq is allegedly roughly the same military consequence after the crisis is over?
No, we don't believe that's possible, but what we do think is possible is to achieve a much better level of deterrence and an ability to make our reinforcement much more secure should we have to reinforce. And then that combination of a Saudi ability to defend initially and an improved American ability to reinforce, we think will be the best kind of deterrence for the future.
And the Saudis have now roughly a 60,000 person military. Is that right?
That's just the, let me check the numbers. That's what we'd call the Ministry of Defense Forces, which is the regular Army and the Air Force. The National Guard's about another 30,000.
Now, in Jane's Defense Weekly recently reported that the Saudis are going to attempt to double that force to roughly 120. Is that correct, or is that? Or in other words, are our sales in any way related to Saudi plans in terms of the size of their military force?
We haven't heard anything like that from the Saudis yet. It would not surprise me if they're thinking about some expansion, but what we're talking about, particularly with this package that's here today, for example, in terms of tanks, is a third tank brigade on top of the two that we already came for last year. It's within their existing force structure.
Well, one of the concerns you've heard repeatedly expressed here today is that I would like to phrase in a slightly different way. Ironically, it seems to me the more sophisticated military capability that is made available to the Saudis, the more likely we are required to continue to have American forces on the ground in Saudi Arabia. And I know that's not what the general perception would be. The notion would be the more capability we give the Saudis, the less we'd need to be there. But in light of the overall capability of the Saudi military, even after such a sale, relative to several of its neighbors, not just Iraq, it would seem to me that we are going to be put in the position of having to have U.S. military forces there in larger numbers than would be required if the equipment wasn't there, because we will need to be there to be assured that if anything breaks out quickly, that we don't find all that weaponry falling into the hands of the more powerful neighbor. Now, that may sound like a crazy notion, but I'm being serious. Tell me why that's not likely to be the case.
Well, Senator, I think the driving concern here is to make sure we don't find the whole country and those vital resources in the hands of a hostile neighbor. And the fact that we've added some additional military equipment there that we're concerned about seems to me marginal compared to the fundamental interests at stake. But what providing the equipment gives us is the deterrence and the ability to get there in time before those critical facilities are overrun.
Well, it seems to me that anyone in the region who would contemplate moving into Saudi Arabia must now know that they go to war with the United States if they do. And so my concern would be that there would be equally as great an enticement with the greater weaponry available to them if they were to move than if they didn't move. I know that sounds a bit unusual, but they're either going to move or not. To move against Saudi Arabia now in light of our actions, any nation is going to have to know they're going to war with the United States. I mean,
and that's the reason, Senator, why they might in fact push ahead and try to seize all those critical air bases and ports quickly. I mean, I'm not sure that if the Iraqis had realized they were coming in, they would have stopped when they did at the Kuwaiti border.
Well, that's it would be an interesting discussion, but probably not very worthwhile at this hour. I have other questions I'd like to accommodate the interest of the witnesses as well, be able to submit them in writing, Mr. Chairman.
We appreciate that, Senator.
The record will be kept open. I would just add, in connection with the witness's last remark, that if the administration had paid a little attention to the resolutions calling for sanctions and disapproval of Iraq passed by the Senate a couple of years, a year and a half ago, and also much more recently, it might have waved a flag of warning. I also would like to associate myself with the views of the senator from Illinois and his thoughts on arms control and his aversion to the idea of pouring more weapons into chaotic centers. And with those thoughts, I wish you well, and the hearing is wound up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Coverage of this hearing concerning U.S. policy on arms sales to Saudi Arabia. For additional information, you can contact the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, 446 Dirksen Office Building, Washington, D.C. 20510. Coming up next, it's a Thursday news briefing from the Pentagon. Good evening. From the nation's capital, you're watching C-SPAN 2. In a moment, we'll pause to update our program schedule for the next few hours. But first, we'd like to remind you that you can call our pre-recorded viewer information hotline for the latest program schedule for both C-SPAN 2 and our companion network C-SPAN. That number, which you can call 24 hours a day, is area code 202-628-2205. Now turning to our program schedule for the next few hours. Coming up just at 12:45 a.m. Eastern Time, 9:45 p.m. Pacific, we go to St. Louis, Missouri for a roundtable discussion on economic forecasts for 1991. A panel of economists and economic reporters discuss their economic predictions made 1 year ago. Following that, it's Thursday's news briefing to review the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, held recently in New York City. Finally, at 3:50 a.m. Eastern Time, 12:50 a.m. on the West Coast, we re-air the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing on arms sales to Saudi Arabia. That's a brief look ahead. Thanks for watching.
C-SPAN 2 and its companion network, C-SPAN, are the cable television industry's channels for public affairs programming. C-SPAN 2 provides its audience coverage of the United States Senate and an inside look at the democratic process. If you have a question or comment about our networks, please write to us at the C-SPAN Networks, 400 North Capitol Street, Suite 650, Washington, D.C. Our zip code is 20001.
Up next, it's today's news briefing held at the Pentagon. Spokesman Pete Williams takes questions from reporters on a number of issues associated with the events in the Persian Gulf.